1 sec. All right. So welcome, everybody. My name is Brian Westbrook, and I serve as the executive director here in Missouri of a group called Coalition Life. We're actually on the other side of Missouri, so I came in, and they only gave us 30 minutes to set up. So here we are. We're all ready and set up. But today's going to be an incredible event. We have some great speakers here this morning that I think will really help us understand what's going on with Amendment 3 and how we can actually move the needle and make a difference with this. I wanted to start out with just a brief story of Chloe Cole, and then we'll bring our panelists up who are experts in this, and I'm really excited to see what they bring to the table. Chloe Cole was a little girl who was born in 2004, so she's not so little anymore. She's 20 years old. But Chloe was born on July 27th. And for most of us, that's just some other day. But for her, it was special because when she left the hospital right before, her parents marked the box female. And what's interesting about Chloe is that at the age of 9, she started puberty. And by the age of 12, they were giving her testosterone and other puberty blockers. And by the age of 15, she had lost her breast. So Chloe had a very interesting childhood, and she called herself kind of a tomboy. And I think it's important for us to realize that within a couple of years, by the age of 17, she decided it was the wrong thing for her. She found a good counselor, and ultimately she is now detransitioned, whatever that looks like. But the damage has been done. She lost her breast, and she will never be the same. Her voice is deeper. Many of her features are simply more masculine. And I think what we'll find here during these panelists and as we look at the language, that this is widespread, that it affects many different issues. It affects girls like Chloe, who's now at 20 years old, speaking in front of Congress about the dangers of sex change operations, especially for minors. And I think it's important for us to realize this is widespread, that affects not just simply the tragedy of abortion, but also affects all reproductive health care statewide at the constitutional level. So without further ado, I'd like to bring our panelists up. Go ahead. Well, we're all going to come up together because we're all in this together. Actually, I'm out of order. Sorry. We have our pregnancy centers, right? Okay. Pregnancy centers are going to, by the way, we have great pregnancy centers all across the state. And so they're going to come up and tell you a little bit about what they do.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Main. I'm the CEO at Liberty Women's Clinic. And we are a pregnancy resource center here in Liberty, Missouri. And we offer free services. We are fully donor funded. We offer pregnancy testing, limited ultrasound, STI testing and treatment, and our goal is to educate women on all of their options and just minister to them, walk with them through their journey, and just be there for them.
Hi, I'm Laurie Phillips. I am representing Resource Health. Recently, the Charlotte Lozier Institute did a study where they found that women who had abortions said that over 2/3 of them said that abortion decision was not in line with their preferences or their values. And so what we're finding is that women and men are choosing abortion not because they're pro-choice, but because they feel they have no choice. And so at Resource Health, where we have 4 locations across the Kansas City metro and a virtual location where we're talking to women who are online searching to purchase an abortion pill at that moment. Of course, our goal is to save lives, but our strategy is to address the root causes of why women and men are choosing abortion. And we do that from the very first visit by talking with them about the options that they do have, the choices that they do have, and helping them imagine what making a different choice might look like for them. We engage the fathers. because we have male staff members who are working with dads, and we encourage them to see what their role in the pregnancy is and their voice in that decision, and also what their role in the life of that child might be. And that makes a huge difference. And then we're coming alongside mom and dad with education, case management, resources and material resources, referrals to any community services they might need. We offer to connect them with a one-on-one mentor, and we offer a class after baby's born too. So we're really trying to make sure that moms and dads can see that there are choices. And thank you so much for the opportunity for us to get to tell you about what we're doing in the community.
Anything else to add? Anything else?
We also do some of those classes as well, and referrals, just so that she can feel like she can make that decision for life and feel equipped. So many times that decision is made because they don't feel equipped. So we also want to show them that they can do it. There is help out there, and we're there to offer that.
Awesome. All right, let's give it up for Brian, I'm going to have you come up and grab the microphone over there, if you could. So we have incredible attorneys across the entire state who are working tirelessly on this issue. Give Brian about 8 minutes, maybe 10, depending on how long-winded he is, to kind of walk through the language. And if you don't already have a copy of that language, please go ahead and get a copy of that so he can walk through. Welcome, Brian.
So my name is Brian Gordon. I'm an attorney in the next county north. I've had my own law office for about 15 years, and I love the law. I love representing clients. One thing I really love is when I can go to the Court of Appeals and argue a statutory interpretation case. And so when we argue a statutory interpretation case, lawyers are arguing about what words mean. And how those words are interpreted are going to have long-term consequences for citizens in Missouri. So with Amendment 3, we have not statutory language, but constitutional language that's going to be added. And so what I'm going to take you through, I'm going to show you the ballot language. I'm going to show you the language behind the ballot language, which will actually be added to our Constitution, and talk a little bit about what it means and how Missouri courts may interpret it. I'm going to rely a lot on two things. One is the plain and ordinary meaning of words, and how Missouri courts look at language. And so it's actually a primary rule of statutory construction is courts in Missouri are required, this is the first thing they're required to do, is to ascertain the intent of the legislature. In Missouri, we call our legislature the General Assembly, to ascertain the intent of the General Assembly by looking at the language of a statute. Constitutional interpretation, they might look a little more broadly, but they're going to look primarily at the language. And so through the language of the statute. Before I do that, I just want to say a word about Missouri's initiative petition process. This is actually the cover page of a document you find on the Missouri Secretary of State's website. The Missouri Secretary of State has a whole packet online of how any Missourian can bring a petition, get signatures, and get something on the ballot to amend our Constitution. And so that process is a multi-step process, but important here is you have to get a certain number of signatures, you have to comply with a certain number of requirements, and then you have ballot language. That ballot language is all voters see. That ballot language has some sort of relationship with the actual text that will be inserted into the Constitution, but you're going to see it's quite different. And so almost every one of these is litigated. And so we have to usually go to the Missouri Supreme Court. Amendment 3 was no exception. And so there's arguments about, is the ballot language fair? So we're going to look at the ballot language, but more importantly, we're going to look at what Amendment 3 actually says. So when you go and you pull your ballot, this is what you're going to see. And at the bottom, you have a yes and a no. I pulled this from a sample from Clay County. Let's make that a little bigger so we can actually see it. This is what will be on the ballot, but this is not what's going to be added to the Missouri Constitution. So I wanted to just highlight a few things that voters will see on the ballot. I'm hoping that, I think that all of you will learn something new about Amendment 3, even if you've seen television commercials, even if you took the time as an informed voter to go to the Secretary of State's website and read what it actually says. I hope you're going to learn something new today. But I'm going to highlight a few things that most voters will pay attention to. Most voters will look at the ballot language without looking at the actual language. So it will establish a right to make decisions about reproductive health care, allow the regulation of reproductive health care to improve or maintain the health of a patient. These are bolded up here, and the bolding is not showing up extremely well. Require the government not to discriminate. Well, we don't want the government to discriminate. And allow abortion to be restricted. I hope we get a chance to talk about that. And so that's what's on the ballot. Let's talk about what will actually be put in the Constitution. There are 8 sections to Amendment 3. I'm going to focus in these few minutes on Section 2. Section 2 is a key to understanding. There's some really important sections, but Section 2 defines the right and the scope of the right. So let's read the actual language they want to put in the Constitution. The government shall not deny or infringe upon a person's fundamental right to reproductive freedom. We're familiar with this approach to protecting rights. It is the primary method used in our United States Constitution. The government shall not infringe upon a right. Okay, so we've got a right, though. What is it? Well, it says which is. And so we're going to talk about what is that right? What is the scope of that right? So you've seen television commercials or you've read a little bit. And again, the voters that take the time to actually look this up, they hone in on a list of 7 items. These 7 items will be listed in the Missouri Constitution right here in Section 2. Prenatal care, childbirth, postpartum care, birth control, abortion care, miscarriage care, and respectful birthing conditions. And so there's a lot of back and forth in the media about what is covered by Amendment 3. And sometimes we're looking at this list of 7 items. But we have some important language here. Missouri courts know how to deal with this important language, including but not limited to. And so what does including but not limited to mean? Well, I came up with a fictitious example. Say we want to pass a law, all cities, towns, villages in Clay County, including but not limited to Smithville, Excelsior Springs, Lawson, and Holt, may levy a 1% tourism tax. So by show of hands, who thinks that Smithville is included in this fictitious law? Yeah, it's explicitly named. What about Holt? Yes, explicitly named. What about Liberty? Yeah, of course. It's not named, but it's included because it's a city, town, village in Clay County, Missouri. Okay? So the question is why would we list specific items in a statute if there are other items included? Why are we listing some but not all? Well, in this example, Smithville, Excelsior Springs, Lawson, and Holt are all cities in Clay County, but they're all cities that are also in other counties. And so maybe the drafters said, we want to make this very clear. We want to include these cities, even though part of Smithville is in another county, part of Excelsior Springs in another county. And so why did the drafters of Amendment 3 include 7 items? Well, I'm not going to answer that because I don't know the answer, but there's no doubt those 7 items are included in the right because they're explicitly named. But what I'm trying to say is that Missouri courts are going to find other things are included. And all of you, I think, understand the phrase including but not limited to, but that's an important one. So how do we deal with that? Well, let's ignore that list and that language for a bit. We know they're included. There's no doubt they're included in the right, but it can be a bit of a distraction as you're reading through this. And this is something, an exercise a lawyer might do, because we really have to pull apart the language we're talking about here. So the first thing I want to hone in on is reproductive health care. What is included in reproductive health care? Well, we've had a lot of arguments in the media about what is reproductive health care. Does it include gender transition surgery, gender affirming care? Does it include genital mutilation? Does it include human cloning? Well, what would a Missouri court say about that? Well, I think when we look at the phrase reproductive health care, which is not defined in Amendment 3, there are definitions in Amendment 3, but reproductive health care is not defined. What do courts do? Well, they look at the ordinary meaning of words, but they also look to case law. They could look to a definition from federal law, or they could look to other states. What's reproductive health care? And so, you know, if one of these issues goes to court, and those issues will go to court, lawyers will argue both sides. And I think you have a pretty good argument that gender transition surgeries, cloning, things like that, genital mutilation is going to be included in reproductive health care. But, you know, reasonable minds could differ. But I want to point out some other language. All matters relating to. Okay, it's not such a close call now. Because whatever you thought reproductive health care meant, all matters relating to. So Missouri courts are going to be fairly constrained by the language of this right. But it actually, I want to back up just a little bit farther. The right to make and carry out decisions about all matters relating to reproductive health care. So now we've really got to the bottom. What is this right? And I think it's really fair to say the Missouri courts are going to look at this language and say the scope of this includes, you know, things like gender transition surgeries, gender affirming care as a right. And so this is just section 2. If we get time later, we'll go into section 3. Section 3 says how courts are to protect that right. And it's incredible, the level of protection. But then we can't leave out this word here, persons. Persons is another term that appears here that is not defined. And person, I think there's a very good argument, probably the better argument, that person will include children. And as we're going to find out if we really drill deep into the amendment, you know, when you get to the other section, that person's right is all that matters. So other rights we have as Americans, I'm getting into section 3 a little bit, are we consider other people. How do they affect other people? Our right to free speech is not absolute. You can't shout fire in a crowded theater. Why? Because of the rights of other people. But with this right, as they want to put it in the Missouri Constitution, it's all about the right holder. No one else matters, including parents, spouses, the community, the family. And so when we talk about person, the better argument is person is not just going to include adults, but children. So you could return back to the ballot language at this point. Again, we'd have to go through the whole thing and compare and say, how does the language of the amendment compare with the ballot language? Those are really good questions. Put them side by side. So that's just a little bit about section 2. Perhaps in the course of the next minutes, we'll get some other questions about 3 and 4.
All right, thank you, Brian, for your time. Let's thank Brian. He'll be back here in just a second. I think, did Hannah leave? Hannah's here. Hannah, if you could come up, and we're gonna change the form just slightly. So if Hannah could, how far does that microphone go? Hold that.
Yes, sir.
Not too far.
I can just stand right back here. Is that what you want?
That would be fine.
Well, at least we know they're hot, right?
So Hannah, if you could introduce yourself, and I think one of the things we want to know, so in your role in the General Assembly as a lawmaker, but also as a citizen, how does this impact you, but also women across the board here in the state of Missouri?
I would love to chat about that. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Tara, and everyone that had a part in making this happen. And it's a privilege to be here. I am from Wright County, Missouri, and you probably don't know where that is. But that's okay, because at the end of the day, what we're here to talk about today affects everyone. It affects everyone now and in the future. I have served in the Missouri House of Representatives for 8 years. And in my final speech on the floor this last session, I asked a question. And it was quite funny to me how it didn't get the greatest response from some people who don't understand the importance of life yet, which speaks to the work that we have to do. But the question I asked was, what are we without our future generations? That's something that we all need to think about. And so obviously you guys are, and that's why we're here today, and those online. But back when we passed the law that allowed, the trigger law, some refer to it, that went into effect when Roe v. Wade was overturned. I had a part in helping with that, and it was such a great privilege. And that was the season in which the importance of this issue went from just being up here and a little bit here to all the way here. Because I was privileged to be born and raised in a home where I was taught the value of life. Not everybody gets that chance. And I don't take the chance that I had for granted. But yet, we were faced with an opportunity to save lives and to save unborn lives by passing the trigger law, to be ready in faith for when Roe v. Wade was overturned. And the amount of people that were in opposition to that law passing, I still remember the faces from that day. And I still remember the angst on all sides of the issue. And that day we passed that bill, and we stand here now knowing what we know and knowing what we face on the ballot. And since then, I have adopted a daughter who's now 22 and living in Maryland. She had a son when she was 14 before I met her. And so I've had to walk, and not just have, I've gotten to walk through her journey with her and witness firsthand the value of the work that you guys do with the pregnancy resource centers, the value of the work done in communities where people step alongside these young people and say, hey, how can we help you move forward? But when we passed that trigger law, I learned a valuable lesson that I hope, God willing, to take with me as I seek to continue to serve the public in different capacities. I was made aware at the time when we were working on that trigger law that there was a little piece in the statute. So basically, if I have an abortionist and I have a medical researcher, the abortionist could only give the aborted baby to the medical researcher. But nothing said what the medical researcher could or could not do with the baby. There was no prohibition on profit in statute at that point in time. I found out about that, and so with God's help and some very good people, including Sam Lee with Catholic Conference, we were able to get that in, but I learned a hard lesson because I didn't follow process. And I'm just a real estate agent. I've not had the legal training you have, so I had to learn the hard way. And so those who support abortion negotiated that out of the trigger law and got me on process. And that is something I carry with me, the responsibility of that. And now people ask me why I overthink everything, and I always tell that story. It's like, I don't want that to happen again. But that day, when I realized that language was negotiated out, that's when it got real for me. And so since then, I was approached along with Senator Mary Elizabeth Coleman to join the Thomas More Society in filing a lawsuit to get Amendment 3 off the ballot. And at first, I thought about it for a minute, and I thought, just do it. Why are we even hesitating? You know, even though at the time I don't know if we had a chance. And we all know how that story went, because if we would have won, we wouldn't be here today. We're here. The lower court agreed with the Thomas More lawsuit that we brought, but the Supreme Court did not. And in the journey of that, I again was reminded of the importance of education, of meetings like today. I had people who had the right, and that I believe in firmly, to express their First Amendment opposition to what we were doing, get in my face that day and say, you lost. And it made me realize the importance, again, of continuing to educate. Because that, I believe, by Amendment 3 being on the ballot, we have a choice in our generation to choose life or death. And the only way that we lose is if Amendment 3 passes. That, so help me God, no matter what happens, the fight will continue to protect life, right? But we lost in the Supreme Court, and so it stayed on the ballot. In all of that, I learned some very serious things that I will share my perspective on very quickly, and tell me if I get short on time. But those include the fact that you must understand, first of all, I'm gonna get real simple. And those of you, obviously you figured out I am against Amendment 3. So you may be in this room and you may support Amendment 3. I'm gonna speak from the perspective of why I joined the lawsuit, of why I am adamantly against Amendment 3, and would love to welcome questions if you have any. But the facts of it are that you've got to understand, if you're voting on any amendment on your ballot, you are seeking to change the Constitution. And what continues to surprise me is that most people don't understand that. So we've got to start there. You're changing the Constitution, period. Think about that. And then secondly, if you pass Amendment 3, and you know a young lady in your life that is faced with a choice of abortion or life, and she chooses an abortion and she is harmed, you pass Amendment 3, there is no legal recourse to do anything about that harm. And I don't think you or me or anybody else with any kind of conscience is okay with that. And that is a huge piece that doesn't get discussed enough. Because the opposition, the support to Amendment 3 tries to say, well, Amendment 3 is for women and babies. I beg to differ. Because if a young lady, if my daughter would have chose abortion instead of choosing life at 14, and she would have got hurt, and she couldn't have done anything about it, her life and my life would be irreparably affected today. And what a shame that would be. And in addition, the conversation about pregnant persons. Women can have children. And as a state legislator who's been given the opportunity to serve, I will not abide by, on my watch, the Constitution being changed in that way. Because what that does is that denies the absolute foundation of biblical truth that we know, and that is God created us male and female. And you can call me old-fashioned, you can call me whatever you want, but the truth is that you cannot go down that road. You cannot go down that road of changing your state constitution to identify pregnant persons instead of pregnant women. We can't do that. We can't go there because it opens a door, as you mentioned, sir, in the beginning with that, including but not limited to. You cannot start addressing people as persons in your constitution. You do not want what that brings. And one final point that I will make, and I'll welcome any questions, I don't want to push our time. You notice and I hope I'm not stealing anything from you when I say this, but we mentioned regulation after fetal viability, that the legislature can regulate after fetal viability. And a lot of people who may feel indifferent on Amendment 3, may feel indifferent on abortion, read that and say, well, you can still regulate it, Hannah. You can still regulate it. Well, what nobody's understanding is when you go to the second page of Amendment 3, the definition of fetal viability is changed. It's changed to the end of pregnancy. Now, see, if I would have loaded my truck up with all my nieces and nephews that spent days in the NICU and are now 18 years old and 10 years old and 3 years old and running around healthy and fine, and I bet we all know those people in our life, it would be a visual reminder to us all that fetal viability isn't at the end of pregnancy. And I go back to my original story, and I will add one more antidote to this with a wrap up. Why did they want that little piece of legislation out of the trigger law? Because somebody was planning on making money. Why does Michael Bloomberg want $1 million put to support the passing of Amendment 3? Michael Bloomberg only wants to do that because somebody makes money if Amendment 3 passes. Period. End of story. That should light all of our fires to do the work that needs to be done, to continue to educate. But I would summarize with a point that my new friend back here made to me that I am so deeply passionate about. We can't just say no to Amendment 3. We have to say yes to supporting our pregnancy care centers, and we have to say yes to supporting our foster kids. We have to say yes to supporting the struggling families. And I'm grateful for the chances I've had to help do that. But you need to talk, when people are talking to you about, well, what are we doing for the babies? I had a chance to help pass a law that gave foster care parents tax deductions. You can get those in the state of Missouri. They are a real thing because it was my bill and the governor signed it. And you can get an adoption tax credit. I'll never forget when they brought it to me the first time, they wanted to keep it where you only got tax credits for children who were born in the state of Missouri. And I insisted that we make it for any child adopted by a Missouri family. Because if you're adopted by a Missouri family, you're a Missourian. And that is now in state statute that you can get 100% non-refundable tax credit for adoption in the state of Missouri. I am going to be seeking an opportunity to represent my district in the Senate in 2026. And one of the big reasons is because we have to continue to work on the things that are not popular to give the answers for what happens after we say no. But right now we have to focus on saying no to Amendment 3 because what are we without our future? And so thank you all for having me, and I welcome any questions, and I hope that I have given some context to why I care so deeply about this subject and support of you all and the work you're doing here.
All right, thank you. Any questions you get to Yeah. So next we have Dr. Bill Hars. Am I saying that correctly? So we're so excited. I've talked to a lot of OBGYNs, a lot of doctors across the state. And most of them tell me that this is the most disastrous thing they've ever seen for their practice and these kind of things. She covered fetal viability a little bit, but could you speak a little bit about fetal viability, these kind of things, and also treating patients, whether it be the women and how we can treat them? And I think some of the questions people are having is also about with regards to, do we really need abortion to save women's lives? Are women actually going to the emergency room? Are they dying in the parking lots? Are they bleeding out in the parking lots? These kind of questions. So please welcome Dr. Bill Hars, correct?
Correct, yes.
Please welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Timothy Bill Hars. I am an OBGYN physician here at Liberty. And yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak about this issue, as obviously it's something that impacts myself, my practice, and obviously the women and children here in Missouri. I mean, I am passionate about life. I love people, and I love people from the time they're conceived until the time that they naturally die, and all stages in between. I mean, what gives dignity and value to me as a person and to everyone else sitting in this room or anyone listening is not what we can do or can't do or what state we're in or anything like that, but the fact that we are human beings, that we have been created by God, and that dignity needs to be upheld at all times, whether it's in the womb or at any other time. So when I go to work and I look at my job and I say, I need to take care of women and I need to take care of babies, both of those people are very important to me. And it's crucial that I think about both of them in every decision that I make. So these babies in the womb need to be protected just like everybody else. And that has a lot to do with, of course, this amendment and everything else. So to speak to some of the questions you had, I mean, my experience as a physician is that I take care of a lot of women who have miscarriages, a lot of women who have ectopic pregnancies, and I've never been restricted in any way, shape, or form of taking care of any of them at my hospital. On the flip side, I have taken care of many, many women who have unfortunately had complications of being treated by people who are not physicians, people who don't have the same level of training and experience, people who aren't thinking about the life of the mom and the life of the baby when they're administering this care in a setting that they're frankly not really qualified to do. And one of my big concerns about Amendment 3 is that it's going to open up this type of health care to people who don't know what they're doing and don't know how to do it. And so when that happens, that's when people wind up coming into my hospital in an ambulance, dying. They didn't get the care they needed. Nobody was following it. Nobody was giving follow-up. Nobody adequately even consented them for the procedures that they were supposed to, that they did. And it becomes very harmful to women and it becomes very harmful to babies. And frankly, it makes my job a lot harder. I would be able to easily prevent many of these complications if I was able to take care of them from the get-go rather than having to get involved after somebody else botched their care to begin with. So, this is something that, yes, affects me personally, but the narrative that we can't provide good health care because we don't provide abortion is absurd and untrue. And it's harmful to women to consider that the only reason a child may be valuable is whether it's wanted or not wanted, and what kind of procedures we might want to do doesn't impact the health of the child. I think really is unfortunate to the dignity and value that all women have in their ability to reproduce.
I'm going to leave you up there if the rest of our panelists could come back up. We're going to switch sides. You guys get this?
I'm Kevin.
We're switching sides. Okay, go ahead and sit down. And we're going to kind of take and I think Brian has a really good point. We need to talk a little bit more about the language and then what does that mean for us and what do we need to do? We've got, a week and a couple of days, but also we're voting now, right? Voting is happening now. And so we need to know what we need to do in the next week or so. Brian, I did want to ask you here in paragraph 3, it says, any denial, interference, delay, or restriction on the right to reproductive freedom shall be presumed invalid. That seems like a very overreaching phrase here. So what does that mean?
So section 3, section 3.
Just get it up real close, I think.
Okay, does this work?
Yeah.
Okay. Section 3 gets into something called strict scrutiny. So think of whatever most cherished right you have in the United States of America, or our protection of minorities, things like that. And courts apply something called strict scrutiny. And so we're very careful not to infringe on core rights. And so what Amendment 3 does is it says, okay, we're going to take something the United States Supreme Court has used to protect our core rights, freedom of speech, et cetera, and we're going to make a super right that's bigger, that it's more protected than the rights of the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution. And so they start off with this thing lawyers call strict scrutiny, where you really have to, the government has to go through a lot to infringe on one of these core rights. And then they put this sentences about such action, any denial, interference, delay is presumed invalid. And then we go farther and we talk about it cannot infringe on that person's autonomous decision-making. So we have this really broad right. When I was talking about Section 2, I did leave out one thing, and it was an important thing. 3 will protect reproductive technologies that have not yet been invented, introduced, thought of, imagined, etc. Just like my example with Clay County, Missouri cities, if a new city is incorporated, it's included under the law. So if we have some rural area or new city, it would be included under the law. So if we have new reproductive technologies that are thought of 10 years from now, or something novel that relates to reproductive health care, come to Missouri. We've got it protected, and our General Assembly can do nothing about it. Well, then Section 3 really gives this super protection. So it gets a bit complicated for the ordinary voter, but it is a really high level of protection. And so the General Assembly is really restrained in what it can do. All laws are presumed invalid, and then they have this enormous hurdle to jump over.
Thank you very much. Hannah, I was very interested here. It says down in Section 5 here, nor shall any person assisting a person in exercising their right to reproductive freedom with that person's consent be penalized, prosecuted, otherwise subject to adverse action. Isn't that kind of what government does? Is they penalize, prosecute, or have adverse actions? So from your perspective, what does this paragraph 5 actually mean?
It's speaking to no recourse, is my understanding of, if a woman is hurt in an abortion. And if I may add to that, you were speaking about some things that triggered my memory of the, what do they say, healthcare professional. Healthcare professional is the only designation in the statute.
Correct.
They don't want to say doctor, surgeon. And why is it that we're so obsessed with, every other medical conversation of, well, nurse practitioners can practice over a certain amount of miles from a doctor, and we gotta make sure everybody but I dealt with this conversation for 8 years, and then all of a sudden, boom, here we are, and we don't even want to say doctor, surgeon, we just want to say healthcare professional. So no legal recourse, no accountability, and like you said, our job from the state role is to license and to make sure that, whatever profession that we license is operating within the appropriate bounds of the law. But if this is passed, there's nothing to hold accountable.
So Dr. Bilhars, how important is, am I saying it correctly? I just want to make sure. We just met, right? So how important is medical malpractice and licensing and zoning, these kind of things? It seems like all of that is stripped away with 3 different sentences in here. How important is that to have those kind of standards?
Yeah, it's a great question. And just piggybacking on what you're saying is it's extremely important. I mean, there's a reason why we have to go to school for so long and learn so many things, and to really be able to make good decisions. And so if you want to have good standards, if you want to say we practice evidence-based medicine and we use the standard of care, you need to have people who can do that, who are trained to do that. And when you open it up to, anybody can provide this care without the requisite level of training, you run into a lot of problems. And it's not even exclusive to those who have training. I mean, there's plenty of doctors who've gone through all the training and have all the right training, but are bad doctors, and they cut corners, and they don't do things well, and they don't follow, good practices. And the problem is that then people get hurt. And so it's important to have safeguards in place to say we have minimum standards of how we should operate and what we should do. So language like this takes a particular issue like abortion care, and you say, well, you can do it anywhere and anybody can do it, and you don't have to have regulations on a surgery center, and you don't have to have follow-up, and all these things that make it so that women can get really good care are stripped away just in this setting. But in no other setting do we do that. I mean, I can't go to my hospital and say, well, I want to do this hysterectomy in my garage, and I don't really want it. It doesn't need to be that clean. I mean, that's crazy. Nobody would approve that. But yet, for some reason, with this particular issue, we want to abandon all of the natural safeguards we have in place and just let anybody do it. And so if the argument is, I want abortion, well, then put forward something that says we can do abortion in a safe, regulated, manner, just like every other medical procedure or surgery you might have done, but not eliminate all the language, to just open it up to and limit all the safeguards, because women will get hurt and already are getting hurt. I mean, as I've spoken to, I have taken care of women who literally have come into my hospital dying because of not getting care or just getting pills through the mail, taking them when they don't know if they have an ectopic or if they don't have an ectopic, taking it at the wrong time, not having any follow-up, essentially bleeding to death till they pass out, are brought in by an ambulance, and now I'm trying to take care of them, and I'm happy to take care of them. But it's sad that it got to that point because there was no safeguard on the procedures on the front end of it. And so that's devastating. As a healthcare provider, you would like to see these statutes be in place to protect women from people doing whatever they want.
Brian, you have something to add?
Yeah, it's Section 5. I just want to point out that in our American society, lawsuits have a purpose, and they protect all of us, even if we're not a party to them. Criminal laws help us all. So there may be dangerous household chemicals. Lawsuits help keep those out of our cabinets. Lawsuits help us regulate things. Criminal laws deter bad conduct. And so, when we say you're immune from prosecution, you're immune from any sort of adverse action, I mean, we're not talking about abortion here. We're talking about, is that a good idea for anything? And so that's what I'd like to add about.
Well, and that includes all reproductive health, including hysterectomies, childbirth. You cover that really well in paragraph 2. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Hannah, you had something to add to that?
No, I just.
Okay, she just happens to be in the middle. Brian, I had a question about paragraph 6 here, and then I think we'll take some audience questions. So paragraph 6 says government shall not discriminate. Does that include government funding?
I understand that Section 6 really is aimed at getting government funding of reproductive health care. And there was arguments about what the fiscal note should or shouldn't have said. The auditor has a lot of leeway. So the voters see this fiscal note that says $51,000. I haven't really got into that issue, but I'm told, it's probably going to be a lot more than that, but that's what the voters see. But Section 6, I understand, was written really to allow for government funding.
Great. We have a lot of really incredible, great programs like Medicaid for pregnant women and other programs related to reproductive health that we do want to fund, but we also don't want to fund abortion or sex change operations for minors. So any questions from our audience for our incredible panelists? That's okay. You can be the first one. How about in the very far back? Any questions in the very far back?
Brian.
All right, Tara?
Do you want me to come up or
Just, there you go.
Hannah, I know you said earlier that the amendment would change the Constitution. I've heard some mixed things about that. Is it true that the amendment supersedes what's currently in the legislature?
Correct.
And if you could speak more to that, if you have anything else.
Yeah.
That's a great question. Again, I bow to the legal expertise in the room, but my understanding of the language written in Amendment 3 is that you will notice it says if passed, the legislature can regulate after fetal viability, which again, you've got to understand, they're changing the definition of when that is. And so my interpretation of the broad compass is anything that's different than regulation after fetal viability is off the books. And we regulate right now to the point that we're one of the most pro-life states in the nation. So the legislature is being told if this passes, it basically wipes a clean slate. And is part of the impetus of why we're working so hard to defeat it because of everything we've talked about today.
Brian, could you talk a little bit about what is Constitution, what is statute, what is regulation, how does that all affect each other?
So the Constitution is the highest law of the land, like you learned in school. Our Constitution has become pretty bloated. It is much, much longer than other state constitutions, definitely, very long compared to the federal Constitution. Some people could talk about, constitutions should really be for your form of government and really core issues, core values. Some people would say, well, we've gotten away from that, but yes, it's going to supersede. The signs are really talking. I don't think I've mentioned the word abortion. And I think there's a case that even if you're very pro-abortion, you would want to vote no on this. But the signs say, end Missouri's abortion ban or keep Missouri's abortion ban. There are other laws that are going to be overturned. I think, there's a statute prohibiting gender mutilation. I think that's going to be overturned. There's some limited prohibition of cloning. I think that will be overturned. There's other prohibitions that I think will be overturned. So,
if I may speak to what you just said about the gender piece, there's a very quiet little thing happening right now that you do not hear about in the news. And it is a court case that happened in Just City. You know what I'm talking about?
I've just heard a little bit.
So I was on a conference call the other day and somebody says, well, do you know Craig Carter? And he's the judge from Douglas County down in my part of the country that got put on this case in Just City. And my understanding is the decision on this case will affect will affect the statutory standing of Senate Bill 49, which addresses whether or not taxpayers fund gender transitions for minors. And the supporters of Amendment 3 want Senate Bill 49 to be overturned for the exact thing that you're pointing out, because if Senate Bill 49 was overturned, then they can take all the gender transition stuff and they can funnel it right through those 4 words, including but not limited, 5, limited to. And so it's all, as they say, the devil's in the details. And it's a very interesting situation. If you notice, you're not seeing anything about that court case right now, because this is about so much more than just abortion.
All right, any other questions for our panelists? Yes, ma'am.
I do have a question about the overturning of the laws. I was at another meeting this week and they said, I think 52 statutes would be immediately null and void. But it just occurred to me, so we receive funding through one particular grant from the state, and then also pregnancy resource centers, people who donate to pregnancy resource centers get a significant tax break from the state of Missouri if they claim it. So I was wondering if those will be immediately overturned. I was assuming that would have to go through the courts.
I'm going to repeat the question for those in the back. So you're talking about alternatives to abortion program, or what's called A2A program, and then also the tax credit, 70% tax credit for pregnancy centers. And she's asking about how those might be affected.
My understanding is that would not be affected, but what's very, very important to understand is those are originated more or less every year through the budget room. I've sat in the budget room for the last 8 years and been a part of the budget that is now $52 billion. But that is the most important work that we do. And it speaks to why it's so valuable and important for you to make sure you know who's representing you in the legislature, have contacts on the budget committee who can make sure and protect that funding, because I will tell you, supporters of abortion work within the budget room to remove that funding every year. And you've got to make sure that you have members in the budget room, you've got to make sure you have a Speaker of the House that will protect that funding come what may. But to answer your question, to my knowledge, no, that is totally separate because that is dealing strictly in regards to monetary, tax code and all of that, so.
Brian, do you have an opinion? Is there inconsistent or?
I think a lawyer might challenge it.
So I said this in a debate against an abortionist. They asked, what is it going to look like after it's passed? And I said, well, we'll just quote Nancy Pelosi. We'll figure out what's in the bill after it's passed, right? And I think that at the end of the day, 7 unelected judges in Jefferson City will determine that.
There's definitely going to be some things that aren't going to be worked out for a little while. There'll be litigation. But I wouldn't say that we should say that this thing is ambiguous. It's broad in scope. You can call it complicated, but there's a lot of known effects. And so there's all sorts of things that may or may not fall one way or the other. But I think when we look at it fairly, we say, how is a court going to look at that? There are a lot of known effects.
All right. Any more questions for our panelists? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so it's my understanding that amendment needs to address a singular issue. And this is so multifaceted, so if it were to pass, is there any avenue for restructuring, rewarding, paring down? I mean, how did he even make it on there in the first place?
So, hold on.
Anyway,
Let me repeat her question. So her question was about a singular issue, ballot initiative has to be one issue, and then she asked, how did it make it on there?
That's a beautiful question, because when we went to the Supreme Court, we had won in the Judge Limbaugh's lower court on that exact conversation. Our lawyer made a brilliant argument that, hey, this is a multi-issue subject you've got going on here, and we're not following the constitutional guidelines. And Judge Limbaugh agreed with us, and then however the Supreme Court did not. But that was the mainstay of our argument, was you've got so many things going on here, and the voters they're not being told properly what is in front of them, because I love how you presented it. That summary is not everything. It's not.
well,
And
after the fact, if it were to be approved after the fact, is there any recourse?
so I can't go into great detail on that, because I can't go into great detail on that here, but I will tell you that, of course, if you are against it, you're planning on faith that it's defeated, but you do have to have a contingency plan. And I will tell you that I am working with people in regards to a contingency plan in that regard, but I can't really speak more than that.
Any other questions from our audience?
I have another one.
Go ahead, Sarah.
To my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it true that if this does pass, in order, kind of going back to her question, if it passes, in order to overturn some of these, a new amendment would have to be brought forth?
The question is, if it does pass, how are we going to overturn it if it is overturned?
If it does pass, I think you will see an effort to overturn it via the ballot, and you will see many court cases. In summary, they will have different shapes, sizes, and forms.
All right. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So, as far as Missouri Medicaid for uninsured women and pregnant women, I know we voted for Medicaid to be expanded years ago. And so my understanding is there's good coverage for women involving birth control. All matters of pregnancy, whether that's miscarriage, ectopic, that kind of thing, minus abortion. What I wondered is, so those things are available to women that have lower income, and I know there's different levels and things. Is the big push that we want taxpayer funding for abortion? Are we already paying as taxpayers? Is some of our money going toward abortion? I just wonder.
No, it's a great point.
Let me, there's people in the back, come on here.
And I'm supposed to make.
So she says, we're already funding some great programs. Are we also funding abortion right now? And I think Hannah's gonna address it. I like Dr. Vilhar's thought on the other programs, if we could.
So when I was first elected, there was some, I believe back in 2016, there was some monies going to Planned Parenthood. And I was put on the budget committee in 2016, first part 2017. And we have been able to successfully zero balance any monies going to Planned Parenthood for anything abortion related. And then of course, when the trigger law went into effect, that also affected, if you notice, there's been some Planned Parenthood shut down. Well, you know, I call it a great day in America. But anyway, so to answer your question, the tax, so I sit on the budget committee. Best way I know how to explain it is this. We have the authority within the legislature to safeguard from taxpayer funds paying for abortion within, and there's been court conversations around that, and I can't quote it right now off the top of my head, but that has been its own battle, okay? But there's people like myself and many others who hold a high concern that taxpayer dollars not being used for this or gender transitions, things like that. Well, goes into the Constitution. The example I'm going to give is an opposite end of the spectrum, but we all know that our education system must be funded. It's in the Constitution. And you can't walk in the legislature one day and just say, I'm not gonna fund the school today. You can't do that. And it would have that same effect if Amendment 3 was passed, if that answers your question. Like it goes from a decision with elected representatives of the people into this mandated no matter what conversation, which is why if it does pass, there will be many court conversations. I hope that answers your question.
So Doctor, if you could address some of the programs that are already being used by some of your patients as well.
Yeah, I mean, the Medicaid has been great. I mean, there's lots of women who are able to get care through Medicaid. We accept Medicaid. It's been pretty good. I always think there's more that could be done. I mean, I think that women need support. They need to get access to having, great care. And so there's been other programs as well. We had one that was in our office for a while that was helping some women, but now I'm not aware of any other really big, large ones, unless you are, but.
No, I was just wondering, like, are women, suffering because there's not enough funding? Are there women walking in the door who are pregnant and they're like, I just can't afford this, and then somehow they can't get care?
No, I think women can walk in and get care. I mean, I have not heard of, there are people who choose not to go, or if they go, then they get a bill, and then maybe, that has to work its way out because sometimes they can't pay it, but they will get care. If you walk in any hospital, you will get care. We cannot turn anybody away. We don't want to turn anybody away. We take care of plenty of women who come in, have no insurance, no ability to pay whatsoever, and it's obviously an impellent violation to not do that, but we wouldn't want to do that anyway. My plug would be for people to get more involved in helping those who need care, who support organizations that can help fund women to get care who have difficulties paying for their health care, because it is a big problem. But nobody's not receiving health care as a result of that.
All right, well, thank you very much. One last question from this gentleman here.
There needs to be a plan to take care of those babies. If the mother doesn't want them, there needs to be a plan to care for them.
So
Abortion costs in this country are way too high.
what costs are,
Abortion,
you mean adoption costs? Okay, so I think the gentleman's question is that, let's say the child is born, but we want an adoption through that. What are we addressing with regards to that cost? Is that a fair question? Yeah, okay.
So as we discussed privately offline earlier, I mentioned earlier, I was able to help author and pass the adoption tax credit for non-refundable expenses. Because if you adopt through the foster system in the state of Missouri, there's many of those expenses that can be addressed and you don't have to pay out of pocket. But for non-refundable expenses, if you were adopting, especially out of the foster system, we have a tax credit to help address the cost, to help give an expectation and relief of that financial burden. And I know that doesn't answer everything, but it was a huge step in the right direction. because as mentioned earlier, it was very tightly confined. When I first got elected, it was very small. I think it was like not over $200,000. And we've been able to tremendously expand that credit. Also, for the first time in state's history, we now have a foster care tax credit. As a former foster mom myself, I know what it's like to get 2 kids dropped on your doorstep and they're like, oh, Johnny and Susie doesn't have any clothes. They need to be in Mansfield school by 8 o'clock on Monday morning. And you're like, whoa, okay, let me go find $500 and barely get clothes on their back and school supplies going, so that they can have the experience that every child deserves. And I couldn't agree more with you. Those are the 2 building blocks that I've helped have a part in. I will say also making sure that, again, the thing that I've learned in 8 years is you need your government officials to make sure that the departments are working right. Medicaid expansion, like you said, did happen, but I'll use this as an example. You can throw money at anything all day long, but all of us know, it's just like your own kitchen table. You can put $1 million on your kitchen table, you go put a match to it, it didn't do you a bit of good. And I think that the challenge that I would give to our listeners and to the folks in the audience here is make sure that you're working with your elected officials to make sure that you're not putting a match to the taxpayer dollar, right? Because you can expand Medicaid, but if it's not ran right, done right, then you're up the creek without a paddle. I will say Todd Richardson is now in charge of that department. Things are looking a lot better. What is not looking better that I hope changes soon is the Department of Family Services, because they have had high turnover. I'll give you a quick example. Last year was my last year in the legislature. Did you know that if you're a foster child in the state of Missouri and both of your parents are dead, and for whatever reason you've got retirement income that you should receive from them, I believe it's referred to sometimes as SSI. At this point in time, Missouri takes in $8 million from that. That is asinine. And so I filed a bill last year that got all the way to the Senate floor, and it fueled my fire to keep on going, because I'll never forget. I was walking onto the Senate floor to go sit in the side gallery, and as any of you paid attention to politics, it was in quite the uproar last year. We were this close. We were 1 vote in the Senate from going to the governor's desk and make sure that $8 million went back to the foster kids. And because they couldn't get along, we lost it. We literally lost it. There was nothing I could do to fix it. So now I'm already talking to the incoming speaker, making sure that that's a priority, that the children, because if you're not in the foster care system, you get that money from your parents' retirement. So why are we punishing kids for being in the foster system? That it's like they're being punished for things that are out of their control for the umpteenth time. And steps like that are being taken right now, and I'm very excited about. They're incremental steps, but I believe they're life-changing in the bigger picture.
Well, let's give a big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you for coming. And just a few final words. So we've got a week plus a few days to make an impact here. The voting is happening now. All across the state, people are voting now. And all I'm hearing is Amendment 3. All I'm hearing across the entire state. I'm going, Tara knows this, presentation to presentation. We're talking about this at every town hall we possibly can. And it's critically important that we go out and we vote now. Every single person in here, we vote now. We vote within the next few days. And then we also bring everybody else with us. So if you happen to have a large van, go around to your neighborhood. Anyone need a ride to the polls? Because now is the time to do that. On election day, there's going to be long wait lines. People aren't going to want to wait in these lines potentially. But now's the time to vote. That wasn't necessarily the case several years ago. We're like, no, you have to vote on election day. Early voting is available to everyone. Let's get out there and vote. Secondarily, I've got, I think, 200 signs in the back of the room there. I want each one of you to take at least 5 signs, okay? At least 5. And here's what I want you to do with it. If you don't already have one in your yard, put it in your yard, 1. The other 4, go in your neighbor's yards, okay? Hopefully you ask permission, okay? The other 4 go in at least 4 other yards. There's one thing that we are winning, which is the sign war here in Missouri. If anyone has crisscrossed the state anywhere, we are winning the sign war. I also have some hope for you as we leave today. So about 2.5 months ago, the polling on this showed that 58% of Missourians supported what was not yet Amendment 3. So 58% in a poll about 2.5 months ago was 58% yes. And so that seemed pretty daunting to swing the state 8 points, at least 8 points, to be able to get under that 50%. But about 2 weeks ago, that number dropped from 58 to 53. About a week ago, that number dropped to 52. And I'm hearing recently that several of the internal polls that are being done by these groups, we're dropping that number below 50% as of right now. So praise be to God, right? And of course, I know polls, I get it, what is the wording, who do we poll, these kind of things. But I think we're moving in the right direction and people are starting to wake up. As I mentioned earlier, I was on UMSL's campus. Literally, to my right was an abortionist, to my left was the gal running for Secretary of State. Who's that?
Oh, yeah.
Pfeiffer, Barbara Pfeiffer, okay? And then, of course, the faculty member was also debating me as well. So it was like 3 against 1. And the moment I said this might include sex change operations, the entire room just erupted. But I think that really hits a nerve. That really, really hits a nerve that if this includes that, people don't want that here in Missouri. And then secondarily, I think it's important for us to actually read the language. All right, I've got some 200 copies here for you, and I think Brian also has another 100 some odd copies for you as well. Regardless of where you stand on the issue specifically, you need to read the language. So near the end of this debate, I said, well, they don't want you to read the language because they don't. And they're like, hold on, sure, you should read the language, but not once did they reference the language, not once. And I think to Brian, by the way, Brian, well done. We appreciate your analysis here. I'm sure there's 1,000 other things you could have told us. But I think it's important for us to read the language and talk to our neighbors. There was an individual, one last point here, and then I'll give you a couple more action items. There was a young student after the debate came up to me, and she believes that we can have abortion in all 9 months of pregnancy. At the end of the day, she thinks that that's fine, and you don't become a human being until you're born. I said, well, can we agree that you're human? Sure, yeah, you're a human fetus, but you're not a human being until you're born. I'm like, okay. But tell me about paragraph 5 here that Brian pointed out. Nor shall any person assisting a person exercising their reproductive freedom, blah, 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 be penalized, prosecuted, otherwise subjected to adverse action. I said, do you agree with that? She's like, no, I think that's bad. I think that's bad, right? So she's in favor of unlimited abortion because I think maybe our college and university systems have told her that she should be. But she's not okay with that. We'll see how she votes. We'll see how she votes. And I think that's why it's imperative for every single one of us to take as many copies of these and talk to every single one of your neighbors, friends, family members, and walk through making sure that you do that. Secondarily, social media, like, comment, subscribe, every single possible thing that you've got. The algorithms, the social media companies, they love that. Like, comment, subscribe, share, all of those things. Do all of those until every family and friend and person you know is annoyed with it. Do it, because you only have a week and a half left. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Tara. And thank you to Tara for organizing this whole thing. We appreciate her and all the work she's doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you so much, both Brians and Dr. Bill Hars and Representative Hannah Kelly for coming out to speak, and our wonderful resources from Resource Health and Liberty Women's Clinic. Thank you, Lori and Jennifer. There are some resources for those that are here in the back of the auditorium area, both from Resource Health and Liberty Women's Clinic, and some kind of just little bullet points from today's presentation in little goodie bags. So please feel free to grab those on your way out. There's also plenty of snacks and drinks left if you'd like to take any with you. Sorry, thank you. I think that's it.
I also have some half sheet, I'm from Missouri Right to Life, I have some half sheet push cards, like that summarize the ramifications of Amendment 3. So if you want any of those, just like a quick little plug or non-plug,
Okay.
I'd be happy to give you some.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming, and thank you for our viewers. Have a great day.